Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on the circular economy, the case for rebuilding cities through a circular economy approach. My name is Yasmin Shepherdji, and I'll be your moderator for the session. I'm from the OFC team, and I'm also currently a master's student at Wits University. So basically, the broad focus of this session is looking at the circular economy. And when we talk about circular economy, it's quite a broad approach and a broad concept. So the aim of the session is to provide different perspectives, approaches, and applications of the circular economy approach, especially reflections for adopting circular economy approaches and projects in an African context. What's quite relevant is the context that we're currently in, the shock brought about by the COVID pandemic that has also had knock-on effects on our economy. So that has repercussions on, well, basically it's more about it's more creating a confrontation for us to see that our current economies and the way we do business models are not really sustainable and are susceptible to these types of shocks and crises. So the Minister, Barbara Creecy, announced that circular economy can be a key component of South Africa's post-COVID recovery. But exactly how we get to that point of integrating across various spheres of society and different sectors of the economy, that is the question of, that's the question that we need to answer. And I believe that can happen through design projects, through research, through collaboration and partnerships. So to kick off the session, I'd like to hand over to Paul Curry from ICLEI Africa to give a brief introduction on the circular economy in the context of the African city experience. Thanks for being here, Paul.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Yasmin. Delighted to be here. There are a number of very exciting engagements around circular economy that have been emerging. Circular economy has for the last 10 years been growing as a concept, being tried out and experimented on. And to me, the concept is now ripe for experimentation, for demonstration, to really show what it can do to drive sustainable development. And so my role here is to offer a brief overview on how we can think about circular economy in African cities. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with circular economy and have been participating in a number of these, but it's all, I think, just to get us a basic foundation for continued discussion. And so I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and use one of my favorite current facilitation tricks on Zoom to put the question of this session back towards the participants. And this can give us and our panelists, who I'm quite excited to hear from in a moment, a bit of meat to talk about. So take a minute and think through this question that the session is asking. How do you think circular economy could contribute to rebuilding cities? And type it into chat. Don't send it yet. Take a minute. Type in what you think circular economy can contribute to rebuilding cities. And when I say go, we can share these. And remember to select on your chat box to send to everyone, not just to the hosts and participants. So I'll type in an answer to high consumption and far away production as something that might be an answer there. Is everyone ready? I say to the open Zoomiverse, take another 15 seconds and type in. It could just be a keyword, it could be a long thought out sentence, and then when I say go, we'll see a shower of ideas emerge. Okay, have I unnerved you enough with the silence? Okay, let's send. So secondary markets, designing out waste, rethinking what we see as waste, efficiencies, job creation, make cities more sustainable and resilient, assist a more integrated approach to city making, more resilient cities, helps us really think about resource use and the ways in which we can maximize our outputs as inputs. So I think there, the themes of circular economy are showing up. So a few ways to think about circular economy from our perspectives. We can think of it as a system of resource management, looking at resources as the focal point, which ensures continuous use of the materials, goods, energy, and waste, retaining their highest value throughout their life cycle. Often circular economy gains purchase because we have to look at it in economic terms to speak to the economists. So it's an economic system of closed loops in which raw materials and components and products retain as much value throughout their life cycle. And I think if there's one thing to internalize about circular economy at the moment, it's that we need to look at the difference between recycling, for example, a telephone, versus keeping a phone's service in use. So if I recycle it, I get the gold, glass, the plastic, the copper, and those have some value, but not terribly much compared with the value that the phone offers as a service for communication. So if I can offer that phone still in working condition to someone else, can share it with other people, can have it refurbished, I keep the value of the phone's communication service in use for as long as possible. And that's really the aim, to shift some of our thinking about circular economy away from waste and recycling as our paragons of sustainability towards more design thinking and life cycle thinking. So the system requires us to also invest in renewable energy as an enabler, take on new design thinking, and really think right up front about the products and services and how we're designing them for a whole life journey through our systems or our cities. In African cities, as we know from constant conversation, we are the fastest growing continent, fastest urbanizing continent, and therefore we can't necessarily rely only on looping of existing products, but really do need to invest in regenerating raw materials because we are continuously growing. ICLEI has put together a framework for thinking about circular economy to join many of those already in the world. There are 5 provocations here: to rethink, to regenerate, to reuse, to reduce, and to recover. And so that's really about redesigning the system, harmonizing with nature, regenerating soils and natural resources, using products and services longer if they are still of usable form, doing better with less, really trying to look at efficiencies in the system. And then, of course, while we don't want to only focus on waste, waste is a great entry point, and we do need to look at how we're recovering resource outputs as new inputs. What's occurred to us while trying to promote circular economy with cities, with urban practitioners, with local governments, is that these principles are relatively universal and aren't terribly different when you're looking at African contexts. And so what's emerged through a collaborative process with a number of people is considerations for how to implement the circular economy. And that's where the difference lies. Most circular economy frameworks speak really about the economic value of products or the resources and products. And one thing that came out quite starkly was that we're missing social considerations and missing governance considerations in many of those frameworks. So what we propose here are 7 considerations. The first is that there is an abundant amount of knowledge available in the world. So really promoting collaboration and appreciative co-learning between circular economy practitioners, between different entities. For cities, identifying what the specific service delivery mandates or what the local government mandates are, and aligning your strategies with those. Particularly, we're coming up on elections in South Africa. If someone is aiming to improve service delivery, demonstrating why thinking about sustainability in that is important. What types of buses are we investing in, of street lighting are we investing in, and how can these contribute to circular outcomes? Implementing circular economy principles within a social justice framework. You cannot come at circular economy in African cities only for an environmental protection perspective. It has to be, how are we creating jobs? Someone put into the chat. How are we redressing exclusion of access to resources? How are we creating equitable access and participation in the circular economy? Acknowledging and supporting existing practice. There are so many businesses, so many practices going on in cities that contribute to what we would call the circular economy, but don't necessarily call themselves circular. So investigating those and drawing those into this paradigm. We've already mentioned regeneration as a key need for growth. And then finally, there are already sustainable policies, frameworks being developed around climate change, around biodiversity protection. We're not saying that all cities need to develop a circular action plan, unless that's something they want to prioritize. But aligning circular principles with those existing plans that are being developed is very useful. Finally, access to finance, drawing people's attention to the need to finance circular businesses. Often these are not huge amounts of money, but simple small grants to get people started. Thinking about public procurement in government and the ability to create markets and demand for products and services that are contributing to the circular economy. Often here as an anecdote, the upfront cost of a, for example, printer or a product may be quite low, which suggests that it's the obvious choice, but the cost of maintaining that product is much higher. And so thinking through the whole life cycle of that product's journey in government is important. So I hope that's provoked some thinking for our panelists to take forward and for some conversation. Please do share your thoughts in chat. And I'm afraid I must do a shameless plug for another of these events on circular economy for some colleagues at Verdant Zeal. So I will throw the link for this event into the chat if it's of interest. And it's really looking at circular business and challenging what a new phenomenon is called circular washing, which is similar to greenwashing, in which it's all talk and no substance. So if that's of interest, please do explore. And I'm looking forward to the further conversation in this session.
Thanks very much for that, Paul. I think the topics of open governance and the social justice framework are very important. And we'd like to see more ideas being discussed, and especially around collaboration and you mentioned co-learning. And learning from different types of stakeholders. I'd like to now introduce the speakers. We have Deborah Nati from Footprints Africa, Alexander Stojakovic from Studio Eightfold, and Dr. Carolina Giraldo Laura from I lost you. Written down.
It's fine.
She's a senior fellow at the Department of Architecture and Design, Politecnico di Torino. Thank you very much for being here. And Deborah will first take us through her presentation. And we'll have a short discussion after the three presenters have given their talks. Please feel free to add any questions, comments, or discussion prompts in the chat, and we will get to them in the discussion session of the discussion portion of the session. Thanks, Deborah. Over to you.
Thanks, Yasmin, and thanks for the invitation to be here. And thanks to Paul for such a good introduction to set the tone for the discussion going on. So I'll just be snappy and short. Okay, so just like Yasmin said, I'm from Footprints Africa. And at Footprints, we believe that the world can be inclusive and it can be regenerative. And so our work is geared towards achieving such a world. So Paul did something, and I'm going to do something similar, but it's also going to be a Zoom shower. Now we know what it is. I don't have to explain much. So kindly get into the chat and type what you love most about Africa. So I'd like for you to type it when I say go, you hit send. So what do you love most about Africa? I'll just give 1 point. Oh, okay. So it's you don't have to send yet. When I say go, then you hit your send. I want to see what people think of Africa. Okay, we should be ready to go now, right? So it's a go. Sunset, creativity, people, resourceful, food, vibrant, culture, creative, diversity, yeah, I see diversity a lot, color, yeah, people, thank you all for sharing, see fashion, that's interesting to see all these, what we think about Africa and the food. Yes, that's also very important. Thanks for sharing. And I said yesterday at an event that this is why we need to protect what we have in Africa. And the circular economy is one way to do that. So we've had a lot of research that has spoken about circular economy already being present in Africa. And so it's not a new concept. But for industrialization, we are moving away from it. However, now we have the opportunity to go back. And here in Ghana, we have a term that we say sankofa is not bad. So when you go back to something good, it's not bad. So we have the opportunity to go back to it. And we are better placed to transition to a circular economy because of our vast wealth in human resource and natural resources. I'm not going to speak much about what circular economy is because Paul has done that. I'm going to share 3 key elements or lessons that COVID-19 has taught us with regards to circular economy. So let's get into it with case studies. Right. So one thing we've noticed is that COVID has taught us to seize the opportunities that we have, the opportunities that we have to build resilient systems. And when I talk about resilient systems, I'm talking about regenerative systems. I'm talking about systems that protect the environment, systems that protect nature, and systems that provide for the people. So we already spoke about social consideration. Paul mentioned that, and that's why circular economy has to address the people, even when it's addressing the environment. And when I say addressing the people, we're talking about feeding the people, and I'm talking about providing job security for the people. And we need to do that by connecting the local community or the rural community to the cities to help build a strong system. So I'm sharing a case from Oko Forest. And Oko Forest, it is an organization here in Ghana, a company here in Ghana, and their aim was to mitigate landscape degradation through farming. So they realized the climate action and the land degradation that was going on. That was the founder. So he decided to establish Oko Forest, and they created step-by-step program to help farmers be able to take on regenerative agroforestry practices so that they are able to produce good and quality food for the local market and for the international market. And that is interesting to know because we need to feed the people locally, and if we have the opportunity to feed people internationally to bring in more money and more opportunities, why not? Okay, so when we are able to build resilient systems, then we need to know that changes would come. And so we need to be open to changes that will come. So we need to make space for innovation, and we need to make space for new ideas, new projects, and new changes. And with this one, I'm going to talk about Use It Rambricks. So Use It Rambricks decided to divert the waste that is created at construction sites and use and produce value out of it. So instead of the concrete that we are using for building, and also the huge deficit that we have, especially in South Africa, the huge deficit that we have in the cities, and this is a South African case, in the cities for lack of housing opportunities for people, they decided to convert the waste soil from construction sites and the rubble when buildings are pulled down to divert them and convert them into this ram bricks, and this includes other materials and other ingredients. But then by doing that, they are producing a material that is much more stronger. It's bulletproof, it's soundproof, and it is, say, 15%, it's 15% less expensive than the concrete that we have, and 45% less expensive than the clay bricks that we have. And that is interesting. What is left for the system and for us as Africans and people to do is to be able to make sure that we are assessing these innovations, and then we are knowing that, okay, this is good, and then we are supporting this innovation. And when I say support, it takes me to my next point, which is collaboration. So in everything that we do, and this is my best point of all, like, we need to collaborate, and circular economy is one principle. It's one thing that talks about circular collaboration most, because the concept of circular economy itself shows that something circular cannot be broken into pieces. And so we need to be together, to collaborate, to partner locally, internationally, and the whole world, so globally, because one person cannot achieve circular economy. That is just by the way. But then we need collaboration amongst the government and the people, so that government is providing conducive environments, it's taking the barriers away, it's providing the support that new innovations that businesses need to be able to grow and be established. So this is Northfeed. Northfeed is a Tanzanian company. It's actually it's an SME that was established, and they try to convert waste from the market, food waste from the market, into feed, high protein feed and compost. Now they realized that the fish farmers were spending so much on feed for the fish, but then they were getting very low returns. So they decided to design this alternative for the fish farmers. Interesting thing is that they got the support from the government as an SME. So they got an office space from the government to be able to operate, so that it would help them to get established. And these are some initiatives that we think the government should put in place. We have a lot of policies that some African countries, or many African countries, have written out. Some are yet to write out. And like Paul said, we are not asking everyone to write out these policies, but then we need systems that would support innovations of circular economy, so we can build our cities, or we can rebuild our cities. And we need to be able to feed the cities, and we need this innovation. So everything connects, and it's just one line or one circular ring of items moving around. And so Northfeed got support from their government, and it has helped them to be established. I know that right now they are implementing other initiatives, because when last I spoke to them, they were trying to prototype and pilot how to use the worms as protein for human beings, and they are thinking of an alternative protein for human feeding instead of depending on the animals for human feeding. So this is just the 3 key elements I'd like to share, lessons I'd like to share. But before I end, I would like to talk about what circular economy is not. If we are thinking about rebuilding our systems and rebuilding our cities, we need to know that circular economy is not recycling. And I want to emphasize this as much as I can everywhere I go, that recycling is just at the bottom of the hierarchy, the order of the hierarchy of circular economy. And it should be the last resort after we have reused, after we have used for a longer period of time, after we have avoided creating the waste at all. So recycling is just not circular economy, and it shouldn't be the buzzword that would hijack circular economy. We also need to know that it is not a developed world innovation, and we as Africans rather have the opportunity to transition, because our systems are not yet developed, and we have the opportunities to now rebuild our systems, because we just started our transition and we are in the middle somewhere. So we have the opportunities to rebuild our systems, to start from the scratch and embed these building on circular economy principles. And finally, it's not an expensive tech solution. We do not need any huge robotic design or ideas to be able to say that, oh, we are implementing circular economy. we can implement circular economy with a little innovation and tech solution that we have. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, just look around you and look for a solution that fits your context, learn from what other people are doing and try and implement it wherever you find yourself. And you can start from anywhere, it doesn't matter. It's something you build upon. And so that is what I would like to share. And finally, to say that circular economy, we need to embed circular economy or our businesses on circular economy. And businesses are the people, businesses is us. And so when we talk about business, we talk about people, then we talk about the cities. And so when we want to rebuild, then we make sure that we are using what is locally available. But then we are not just building because we want to be secular, but we are thinking of the implication of whatever we are building or releasing into the system for now and for the future. And this is me just extracting from Gantopoli's quote. Thank you, and I'll end it here so we can continue in the panel discussion. Over to you, Yasmin. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deborah. The notion of the regenerative economy and regenerative systems is very important. What comes to mind for me is regenerative agriculture. I did some of that you touched on it. And in many African cities, I think that more locally sourced food production and sustainable food systems can really go a long way in helping people, both from a nutritional side, but also in terms of community development and food security. Okay, so the next speaker that we have is Alexander Stojakovic from Studio Eightfold, and he will be giving a presentation on the different perspectives of the circular economy and some local case studies that he has been involved in, some design projects.
Thank you very much. Can you see that? Is that all okay? Great,
yes.
Fantastic. So hi, I'm Alexander Stojakovic, Studio Eightfold co-founder and director. We are a team of two. Well, we started off as a team of two. We now the company has grown, but we started off at the University of Cape Town. Alex then went off and worked in Chile for a little while. I came to the UK and worked for the likes of Grimshaw, but we studied at the London School of Architecture, where we then set up the practice in our proto practice year and have since, we had our 4th birthday just the other week. The reason why I bring up the London School of Architecture just as a base note is it was founded on the premise that we need to change our systems, kind of everything that we're chatting about today, circular economy, but also, how do we educate and how much does it cost to educate with the large amount of debts that are going on at the moment, but also importantly to try and bring theory and practice closer together and send designers out into the world to try and make the change that they want to see in it. I'm just going to concentrate on 3 major topics. The first one being perspective and understanding, looking at some exhibitions we've done. The second being scale and opportunity, looking at neighborhood scale infrastructure. And the third, a research and development project that we've started, which actually started at the Seoul Biennale, which we've then taken on further. So the first part of this is we were asked to write, after we left university, we were asked to write a series of articles for the Evening Standard here in London, around the waste issues in London, around pollution and the effect of logistics on waste and the economies of scale. And it became very clear to us that one of the major issues is relatability. And when you see the numbers, especially in London, of 831 megatons of CO2 is emitted from the construction industry, I think most people don't even know what a ton looks like, let alone a handbag or a satchel worth of CO2. So how can people relate to that when the scales are so vast? So we look to challenge that notion of kind of on the experiential to generate people's knowledge, to create action, and to create consequences. From this, we were invited to do an exhibition, which we named Waistline, tightening our waistline. But we were given a space, a pharmacy space, or a retail space just down the road from Harrods on a very high-end street, where we created an exhibition that wanted to challenge the everyday person, but in 3 stages. So the first was the retail, the street facing, which was asking a series of questions. The second was the experience of it, and then the third to show the solutions. Within that space, the second part, after they've been provoked with the question and intrigued to come in, we created a space using majority recycled elements. So a lot of the timber and the construction materials were taken from the Crossrail infrastructure project. There were some new materials with mirrors, but those then went on to second homes. What we did was we had collected our commercial waste within the practice, or the space that we were based within, over a space of a month. So there were 12 people. And so you could equate that to one person's waste, commercial waste, so simply the waste from the office, over a year. And we placed this in a 4x4 meter box, quite beautifully curated and placed within their certain piles. But because of the kind of Yukosama effect, so the mirrors, the infinity of mirrors, people could then start to relate with space and time and quantity, and time being a very important aspect. So if you times this off into infinity, or off into the direction of, or let's say 8.3 million people in London, you could then start to see the effect of one person in this box, but then times by 8.3, the actual scale and vastness of the waste which is generated purely in a commercial aspect. And what was the most brilliant thing about this was when people started to leave the space, or this exhibition chamber or experiential chamber, they came out coming with the shock and awe of the vastness of it, but also with a lot of solutions, like the simplicity of saying, the milk person to drop off their milk, and reuse the bottles, or not buying coffee cups, or not buying bottled water, or making sure that they went to a refillable shop, or whatever it may have been. But what was so great about it was that people stopped blaming, we found that people stopped blaming large scale corporates and started to saying, actually, I can provide the change that we need to start to see. And especially if you times that out by the mass of people we have in our cities and the world, you can start to actually create change yourself. And then the third part of it, which was great, is we worked with, we asked some of our collaborators to exhibit their products. The one here being coffee logs, so taking a lot of wasted coffee from coffee shops around London, turning into byproduct and compressing it. So what they do is they compress these into coffee logs, and through that compression they generate a bio oil. But also generate these coffee logs which can be burnt, and they're cleaner energy and burn 7 times more efficiently than what you would with wood. They also smell quite nice. But the bio oil is actually used in some of the buses around London. So all of a sudden you've got this waste product which no one really wants, and you're doing 2 fantastic things from it. But actually we had a series of tours, and this was one of them, with a garbologist, which I thought was the most fantastic title for a person's skill set. But she started to ask the questions to provoke people, and saying, why, and this one sat with me particularly, is why are we using something like a can, which is made from aluminium, which has a 450-year shelf life before it degrades? Why are we using that to store liquids for a 20-second experience? There's a shift, there's an issue there in terms of time and what that product is used for. And so that then, we since then we've done a recent exhibition which actually looked at that, and challenging. This was at a product design exhibition in just outside of Beijing, China. And the question here was, our product was the question, rather than showing a new form of smartphone, etc. And I think it was quite provocative at the exhibition itself. But saying, building a fake landfill site and using a whole bunch of products that we had found on the streets of Beijing, painted white, to say, we can't recycle this. This is a composite material. You and product developers, product designers, architects, any form of designer needs to think about the cradle to cradle. So how can this be pulled apart, stripped apart, or reused even? I think it's brought up earlier. So, mobile phones, e-tech, how can that be broken down? Simple elements, but just haven't been thought of in the full aspect. The second part of this is the scale and opportunity, or opportunity that comes from scale. This was the thesis project. The photo on the left was actually on the ground research. This was one of 14 trolleys of dessert that was going to go off that day from a place called Costco in the UK. But generally, the kind of Christopher Alexander issue of the centralized waste infrastructure, where everything is collected in the city but then taken out. And so you've got logistics issues, etc. But the project was really looking at, it was called Wasteminster, play on Westminster. We like to play on all our project names and titles. But in effect, this was using a wasted building. Here it was a car park in the center of Soho, which was had a lot of tension in it because it was the developers were looking to turn it into high-end residential. And the city wanted it to not be bashed down because of its listed heritage, but also that it needed to do more for the city. And so we jumped in there and kind of did a provocative proposal, mapping out waste networks within central London and saying that actually part of it could be used for recycling, food waste collection, to take on a lot of the food from Soho. We worked out that there were roughly 13,000 meals which were being thrown away, which were still edible, create soup kitchens, generate electricity and gas for the local shops too. And importantly, kind of architecturally, I guess, mix this. It's complex. So you have a series of spaces which talk to that complexity that go up and down the building. And the problem with this is this relationship between back of house and front of house. And so that kind of experiential nature, we believe, is one of the fundamentals in creating the change, because it educates people to make the change themselves as well. And importantly, also, when you're in a city like London, cost per square foot is very, it's very high. And so you need a building to work nearly 24/7 to make it economically viable. And so there were a series of programs within the building that helped that. This was a recent project which we did a feasibility study for, and then we were invited to an international competition for. Unfortunately, we didn't win it, we came third, but we joined up with the architect Bureau Lindstedt in Germany, or Lübeck, just 2 hours outside of Berlin. And this is an existing landfill site, 84 hectares, with a further 100 hectares for potential further land filling, a policy that was written nearly 25 years ago. But they are nearly at the end of their filling out their first landfill mine, and really want to challenge this notion of not having to put stuff in landfill. And it's a really high tech company. What they do the sorting out, so people don't have to sort things out at home, but rather you put it all in one bag, and actually the machines on the right hand side here actually sort it out for you using water, infrared, magnets, etc. So it kind of simplifies the market and helps more to be recycled or reused. But the big thing here was that the question in the feasibility study is, could we mine landfills in the future to get the resource back? And the answer was yes, but it's too expensive now. But that's not always going to be the case. But beyond that is also the education aspect. And part of the proposal was to create a new destination for the city, where people could actually come, the public could come, but not only that, universities, schools, startups could come and have a hub where they could safely test things, where they could get access to materials that were considered waste, but that they could practice on or scientifically test. And beyond that, kind of the educational aspect is getting schools involved. So having an exhibition hall, having a one-to-one testing lab, having an innovation center. And part of that, which is another thing that we've come across doing exhibitions, etc., is getting people much closer to the point of the waste. So mixing that back of house and front of house, as you would typically get. So which typically would be so disconnected within infrastructure, to actually bring that a lot closer. And along this, what we call the recycling road, which had the gantry that would then lead into the what was called the Forschungshalle, or the main central hall, to test materials, is to create a plug and play scenario of different scales where people could invest at different levels to take on different space, kind of the wiki house concept, some form of standardization to create real opportunity so that shared infrastructure could be used. Because one of the things that we found is that there's 6,000 types of material that we can construct with, but generally most people only use 6, your concrete, your glass, your steel, timber. And one of the major issues that's stopping things like mycelium bricks or recycled plastic cladding or upcycled materials is the cost of testing it and the insurances and the warranties. To do a fire test is hugely expensive, and for a startup, it's not even viable. And so we're hoping through this kind of dialogue or collaboration to create the space and place where that could be done, so that things can then start to move more progressively in terms of the material market. And then, part of our concept was to use a lot of the materials from the site. The timber around the site could be used for the CLT construction, and because it was on clay deposits, we could then use it for rammed earth walls. And so, just to kind of end off quite quickly, is a question that we've started to work with, which developed at the Seoul Biennale, is what else can waste tell us when it comes to design? And it's turned into a research and development project because we think it has legs. And the main being that in the UK, at least one person per week will throw away 1 bag of trash, in terms of the understandable scale. And we see this as a complete missed opportunity, kind of a named live archaeology of what cities are doing and how we can change them, and moving it from the quantitative to the qualitative understanding of our waste, and identifying the kind of waste or mining the waste will help us tackle, at least on policy side, forms of making the city. So typically you have the existing waste system, which we all know. It then, it goes the urban environment we consume, and then we get to the refuse bag, which we call the magic black bag, and then it disappears out of sight, at least in kind of a London context, and then it goes to existing waste management. However, with this kind of data set that we would then hope to create, we could then have a trickle-down effect all the way to inform changing the user's understanding of it and everyday use, but also creating that real-time urban planning tool. And the design idea was to, in effect, with autonomous vehicles becoming more of a part of the agenda, is to take over 2 to 3 parking bays and use the technology which we discovered through the Smart Recycling Factory to, at a neighborhood scale, sort out and incentivize users where you could get credits for traveling the better you recycled, or the better you didn't use or consume, or the less you consumed, and therefore then alerting small scale waste collectors to come and pick those materials up when it got to 95%, because up to 15% of a lot of the CO2 emissions, especially in London, are through trucks on the road. And so how can we change that in terms of a more efficient system? And some of the ideas that have been started to develop is, I'll just give you one example, like in Hillingdon, where there's a highest car ownership, they also have the worst obesity rates. So is there a relationship between ready meals, high sugar content in meals? And by scanning these in these areas, we can then start to develop urban policy and frameworks to create this live kind of network of changing the urban environment for the better. But I will leave it there. And I mean, I guess that could be a question of what is the live archaeology of places like Cape Town? Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Alex. The importance of waste management and processing, as our cities are urbanizing quite rapidly, especially in Africa. I think we need to actually grapple with how to transition from our current state of the way we take, make, use, and expose. That's the conventional system of the way we live our lives, And I also believe that technology, some of the things you mentioned, the need to speed up the testing and standardize certain products and get them into the market, that will really, it should be beneficial if we can pilot certain ideas and then learn from them. I think that's really important. I think now, to get a broader perspective of systemic discussions on circular economy and the circular city, I'd like to introduce Dr. Carolina Nora. And she will be looking at how can the circular economy model be envisioned for African cities, and what are the challenges and opportunities for this transition in terms of governance implications and implementing the circular city models.
Now can you see my screen? Sorry, it was like crazy. Okay, yes. Good. So I'm going to go like one level more. I think that I'm going to connect a lot with what Deborah and Alex was saying. I hope I don't repeat, because Paul as well said a lot of the concepts that I wanted to approach. But so my focus that I'm going to show you today is a bit of my research of my PhD, and also a bit of the research I did in South Africa, specifically in Atlantis, an industrial precinct that I'm going to speak later today. So I'm going to focus more on how we're going to co-design this African circular city. At what levels of decision making, and what are the tools that we need to basically create a model of circular city that is resilient over time, and is not just the strategies that, yeah, we do the project and then 2 or 3 years later it dies. So what are the circular city model can be envisioned for African cities, and what are the challenges and opportunities? So first of all, I'm going to take little like resume of what we have a circular city in our minds. Of course, we think about like the models of eco-cities that are in Masdar, in Abu Dhabi, in the Emirates, but also we think about sometimes the small cities that are like what some of the concepts that Alex was saying, and Copenhagen or Stockholm and so on, where basically through technology we can also approach eco-sustainable services. And also other approaches such as the material flow analysis. Some of this has been also applied in some African contexts, for example, with microentrepreneurship, and also flows at more small scale levels, not only like at big scale. And also other kind of circular city plans, such as the Paris one, that is a more holistic view, where they have considered widely not only the material flows, but also the work with communities as well, how we can include them. But as Deborah was saying, like, of course, this is not just about technology, or it's about big budgets. And of course, this is a very global north kind of vision, but how we're going to make this kind of vision work. These frameworks, however, have a lot of problems. They are working economic silos, their lack of value creation, they address production, not consumption, they are very focused on resource efficiency. And of course, as always, is a very top-down vision of how circularity is imposed into cities, rather than, okay, understanding what is in the territory, what is the systemic, what the system is offering. So basically, if we have urban environment, how we're going to create this circular policy making for creating a circular city model, what are the challenges? So the challenges for circular economy, of course, not everything is pretty. It's a wider perspective, from cultural perspective, institutional, technological. There are a lot of barriers to do this. So, but the most important one is governance at the end of the day. How most governance to apply circular economy, innovation, and sustainability act in a very linear, reactive way, like problem solution, instead of looking at these problems in a more complex and adaptive perspective. For instance, that will be the way to create local value, to generate resilience, and really generate tailor-made solutions that can endure over time. So in that perspective approaches what the discipline where I work the most, that is the systemic design approach. So how through the systemic perspectives we can approach this complex and adaptive vision that we need for governance to generate value and generate the resilient circular city models that we need. Not like, of course, in the case of Africa, is going to have or certain local characteristics, and in different geographical, of course, it depends on the complexity of the system. So I'm going to talk about a bit of my methodological approach, where I come from. So basically, this systemic design approach is an approach to design processes that basically it's based in 5 pillars. That basically the output of a system becomes the input of another one to create new relationships to generate an autopoietic system, a system that regenerates itself, that acts locally, and basically where demand, like communities, are the center of the project. So how we're going to have these systemic visions, or like these circular city models, like based on embedded visions on their territory. It's not just about, okay, technologies, okay, how we're going to localize such approaches. The systemic design as well. So this allowed us to understand that this is a discipline that allowed us to, that it's a tool for decision making. How through systemic design approaches where the top down can meet the bottom up and redesign the current system dynamics. It's not about, oh my God, the government is the evil and the people is right. No, it's about how we're going to generate horizontal dialogues between one another. And that makes us, okay, how this is going to intervene to the actually policy cycles, how we're going to do policy design with these systemic perspectives and really generate a vision of circularity that involves the territory, involves the system in a resilient way. So if we have the context, we interpret the complexity, we can have better implementations, in this case, the circular city model. So now I'm going to get into deep of how these systemic approaches can be applied in a African context. So going into the example I'm going to approach, it's the case study I work for almost through a year, that it's Atlantis Precinct based in Cape Town, South Africa. This precinct has a very particular story. Basically, it is based 40 kilometers away from CBD, city center of Cape Town. It was born in 1965 as an industrial precinct, basically with stimuli from the apartheid government. This industrial precinct was created. Lots of colored people were enforced to live there. And basically, it was a flourishing industrial area for 20, 30 years, where more than 140 companies were there. And when apartheid was gone, stimulus were gone, companies disappeared. And of course, we have a wicked systemic problem in which we have a depressing community that was isolated and many, many problems generated from there. And over the years, the government has tried to, just say, doing programs, reestablish companies, but the wickedness of that area, of this post-industrial phase, never went out. So now new plans in this area have come with the new development of a special economic zone in green technologies, which aim to create basically the first green precinct, green circular precinct of South Africa. And this is a new opportunity for this precinct, but there's a lot of wicked problems that could repeat the story of the past. So more or less, this is how it looks at this precinct. We have a population of 70,000 people, and also it's a very has an agriculture area, desert area, and the surroundings. has lots of, still there are some companies, but there's a lot of industrial voids. There's still some companies like that are still in the area. There's a lot of lack of densification of housing. There's very, very few commercial spaces. It's a very, let's say, Getty sites area of Cape Town because it's very, very far away. So there are not so much, let's say, people. It's basically living in, in a ghetto where there's no much opportunity. There's not much like going on at levels of businesses. And also it's a very violent community when all the time there's strikes, there's like, has a high problem of alcoholism, violence, and so on. So in this like very critical, wicked scenario, of course, first of all, I start looking, okay, what are the grassroots initiatives or the circular initiatives that are emerging in the community and that could be served as well for these special economic zone master plans that are being developed. I was also working very closely with Green Cape, Westgrow, and Arup. That was the three actors that were developing this master plan, and my research like informed this kind of big infrastructure plan that it was going on at the now still, I think. So there are a lot of community kitchens, there are urban farming initiatives, there are cultural groups like associations that are basically re-emerging again after so many years of not having a relevant presence. This is on the side of the grassroots and the side of the circular precinct. This aims to bring like big infrastructure companies, for example, that does wind energy, that does a lot of industrial symbiosis, or for example, byproducts or bio-waste processing companies as well. So also they know like this special economic zone is aware of this this need for the skill development program and so on, but there are still of the missing, let's say, pieces of this puzzle to be solved. So basically what I did as well, I applied a systemic design methodology where I did a holistic diagnosis, a mapping of the context, and then I could assess with the community and the different stakeholders this systemic mapping and see, okay, what are the policy recommendations or how, what is like, let's say, the leverage to activate a more resilient circular precinct for Atlantis. So of course, the stakeholder identification, I work with a quadruple helix approach where I was working with the Atlantis Community Stakeholder Network, Westgrow representing like all of the industrial part, Green Cape as all of parts of the R&D, and the city of Cape Town. On the policy framework analysis, of course, it was important to map all of the top-down, all of the policies that had happened all over the years in this area to understand what they got wrong and what they got right. Because as well, you can propose how many master plans you can, but if you are committing the same mistake over and over again with traditional reindustrialization programs, you're not going anywhere. And also it was important to map all of the bottom-up initiatives, all of the kind of social entrepreneurships, cultural associations, everything that could be a leverage to unlock this, let's say, bottom-up and also be included in a wider, let's say, master plan for the Atlantis. It's not just about the big infrastructure. At the same time, I map a lot. I took qualitative and quantitative data of the territory and developed like this kind of maps, where it was very useful to have all these kind of holistic diagnoses from different categories. I will show the other ones now, to have all of the elements in the table and say, okay, with all of my stakeholders, see, okay, this is the amount of infrastructure, this is the amount of green, so we can identify the challenges and opportunities of the territory. This was done as well at levels of economics, of demographics, of culture, and it was interesting to see how, and to create a common language for all of the stakeholders to have a say. And also to make, for example, the very technical people of Arup saying, okay, there's all of this cultural activity happening around, like how can we stimulate or reactivate this territory through having the whole information on the hand. We have, of course, this is like a very resume of the definition of problems and leverages. Of course, this is challenges as value creation. So, okay, we have a lot of challenges in this community. We have enclave, alcoholism, gangsterism. So how this kind of like very wicked problems, we can turn it into an opportunity, and also opportunities as value creation. So how these very key things of Atlantis can like be the key to stimulate better circular activities. Then in the second and third phase, design the system, we took this information, the maps, and also put in the consideration of key stakeholders and start envisioning together, okay, what circular economy activities are happening, are planned, and could happen seeing all of these resources. This is what I'm just saying. So this also allowed us to understand, okay, this is like a very wider category. When I'm talking about regenerate, it's okay, like urban gardening, green walls, the things that have to be with regeneration activities. Adapt is about infrastructure. Looping is about industrial symbiosis, recycling, and so on. And there are others for kinds of activities. In the case of Atlantis, it was very clear that it was a lot of the looping activity, because there's a lot of initiatives done by WISP, the Western Cape Industrial Symbiosis Program, that has been educating some of the industries there. So this is a potential that could reactivate all of the relationships between the different circular activities that that were happening in the district. The barriers that I find that it was very clear to produce such a dynamic is that there's a scarce institutional support. Nonetheless, we have all of the budget of the special economic zone. There's an absence of supportive regulatory framework of how these activities should happen. What is the regulation? The current cultural values. So basically, there's very little culture on let's say circular activities, and also like value creation, like enhancing the local value of the territory. So, and also other thing that it could be a risk is the dependence on big companies' money. So basically, also the special economic zone will bring home big companies, but also at the same time, it's a risk to depend on a big foreign capital. So we need to embed like local activities. So the systemic design provide to the macro vision the missing micro bottom-up dimensions, enable the visualization opportunities for value creation, and so on. Some of these I already say it. I don't know if I'm running out of time. I'm almost done. And the last question, what value can system design approaches bring to the field of public policy and circular economy in African cities? Just to come back to what I was saying. So this systemic design approach for circular cities brings, on the side of the public policy, activates systemic transition, allowed us to have a common understanding of the policy gaps, allowed us to have a dialogue between the micro, the macro, allowed us to have certain facilities for the co-design. How can we dialogue and generate horizontal dialogues? And also at the levels of foresight is very important, because we think that circular cities and circular economy is like doing a magic trick. And it is more about a foresight vision. It's about having a short, medium, and long-term vision, because systems just transition with foresight. We need to see a system transition, we need 10 years. Yeah, that's a spoiler, but it's the way it is. So we need as well activities that allows to the communities to say, oh my God, for example, what Alec does, that's the activation. That's like the short-term things that we need to like waken up our the conscious, but also think, okay, we like this, how we can make it in a medium and then long-term vision. And last but not least, how these kind of approaches create value. Value creation is I think is the concept that we should handle within the circular economy. It's not just about effectiveness, it's about how this holistic approach allowed us to understand value creation on the technical side. Okay, we have less access to circular economy tech, as Deborah said. So how can we develop, let's say, or identify local technologies that also unleash this potential of circularity? Or for example, how if we identify situations of violence, unemployment, poverty, how, like, through this kind of mapping, we can also propose the integration of this, let's say, marginalized population into other entrepreneurial activities. And also, at last but not least, but from the cultural side, for example, how can we also integrate ancestral knowledge of our territories? For example, in the case of Atlantis, it was quite interesting to understand that the special economic zone didn't consider the ancestral knowledge, like the typical, for example, kind of herbs that are in the area, the kind of ancestral knowledge that also holds part of this circular economy. And thank you. I hope I was on time.
Thank you. That was
I ran for my life, but I think it was good.
Thank you. That was very informative, and I think all your illustrations were just right. I think that took us through a deep dive of what systemic design for circular economies is. It's very complex and nuanced, and when you speak about foresight, that is the backbone of what urban planning is supposed to be. So I really hope that in terms of urban planning in particularly South African cities, we can start to really interrogate what circular economy city models look like and how they can be specifically created for our cities. I think now we can have a look at, would you like to have a look at the chat and respond to some of those questions? I see a question here from Amy saying, in our context where unemployment is already high, does a circular economy provide or restrict opportunities for creating new jobs? The floor is open to any of the panelists if you...
Okay, so I can just start. That's an interesting question. So I mentioned earlier about the fact that we are better positioned because we have a vast wealth of human resource. And the circular economy, quote unquote, I would say is a working concept or a working economy, because when you need people to disassemble an item, maybe you have a phone and need people to disassemble it, then you need more people to be taking the different parts of the work, people who are going to pick out the specific different parts of that item, people who are going to recycle it, and different people who are going to use it to make other materials. And so circular economy rather provides us the opportunity for new jobs, and it gives us new job opportunities. And it's interesting, but we need to tap into it, and we need to see these opportunities so that we see how we can relate it to our local context again, and how we can make room and make space for everyone. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Okay, we have also another question from Michael, who asks, how can cities promote resource decoupling in order to transition cities from a linear metabolism to a circular metabolism?
I think, I mean, of course, we can approach it in a very, let's say, urban metabolism, industrial ecology kind of way. Like those studies exist, that's a science. But I think that that's the problem, is how our communities consume, because it's not just a matter of like measuring, okay, like water goes there, like we're going to do this, because it's not that we are like living, like our flows live here and we live here. No, how, like, for example, in a city, how many components has a family? How many times a day I go to a restaurant and I don't cook home? Like these kind of things of our daily life that I think cities should be more deepening into the habits of their citizens to really reevaluate and have like a very let's say, a more holistic approach to this kind of urban metabolism perspective, and really low down like the consumption of resources. So it's about like, yeah, knowing, localizing really like this kind of strategies.
I think also, if I can just add, if it's about daily lives, the way we commute also, and linking that to the types of emissions that are associated with different types of public transport. And then also going nationally, if you're driving somewhere else, it depends on the scale. So it's, I think maybe another thing to keep in mind is the different scales, and which approaches are more useful at different scales. I think, Alex, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you. I think really good question, because I think it also touches on what Carolina was saying. I mean, this is a real tension in our office of trying to understand that scale aspect, and the bespoke nature or the tailor-made. Yes, you know, standardization is the way of kind of creating efficiencies, but it actually is a defective. And I think taking the time to do the Atlanta study and kind of get to the nitty-gritty, the real kind of cultural core essences of space, of places, is important, and giving ourselves the time to do that. Because, you know, is it okay? I mean, we have a problem within our, you know, we have a question within our studio. Do you send out an answer just because you run out of time, or do you wait and you develop a really good answer so that you know that it hits the mark, be it a drawing or whatever it may be? So I do think that kind of bespoke nature, you know, an answer for London won't necessarily be the answer for Torino or the North, you know, in terms of the Western cities. But, and I think it's the same to do with African cities and Cape Town or Johannesburg. Yeah.
So may I add?
Yes.
Yes. So I also believe that first of all, I like the concept that Alex mentioned earlier in his presentation about, could we have to mine the landfills? Well, we are partly doing that in Africa, where we have the waste pickers going to the mines, going to the landfills to recover plastics from there, and we have those who go recover the electronic waste. That is one. I also believe that we already have a lot of materials in the system, and we need to focus on reusing those ones. And how do we recover those materials so we can reuse them, so that we are not going to mine more materials, because we already have enough in the system, but it goes to waste. I think we can do a lot with what we have, and government can also support by placing tax sanctions and tax incentives. So sanctions on those who are going for virgin materials, and tax incentives for those who are going for used materials and trying to recycle or upcycle them, so that we are growing, but we are going to depend on what we already have in the system and how to create value out of it, and how to keep using them for a longer period of time. Yeah. Okay.
That's a good point, Deborah. It brings to mind like the sharing economy. How do we use the resources more effectively? And also, like you mentioned in your first presentation, it's not about recycling. The more important aspects is how do we reduce consumption first, and find other ways to use different types of resources. I just see another question about incorporating circular economy to the built environment. Would you like to? Sorry, I didn't see that. Rashik, would like to come in?
Thank you. Thanks everyone for your amazing presentations. I suppose the question is for all the panelists. I was thinking of Atlantis, or I suppose any community, even if it's in Soho in London. But Carolina, if I think to some of the Italian examples of circular economy being applied to a building, what then happens when you take that to sort of an empty field or a site in Atlantis or community? You meet with traditional leaders, you meet with school headmasters. As Alex mentioned, the exhibitions are really about speaking the same language and understanding the magnitude, not just of waste, but of the things we're talking about. So I'd like to hear from maybe Kalina, Alex, and Deborah, how do you land circular economy so that on the one hand, we see these entire buildings which have got these approaches, but in this global South context, how do you start the conversation? How do you communicate what the purpose is? Yeah, I'm just thinking, let's say a day one workshop. And Carolina, maybe you can share a bit of that experience. Because I assume audiences and perhaps in the global north are more accustomed to sustainability, but even perhaps new to circular economy. But there is no flashy building to showcase yet in our context. Whereas I think if you think of the regeneration of some of the industrial buildings in Italy, there's sort of these live sites where people can go and actually experience what you mean. So what are your challenges in communicating? You're also from the global South, and you work between the two.
I am a fictitious global North person, I know. I'm from Colombia, for the audience. They didn't know it. So basically, I would like to begin that during my PhD, I also was doing experimentations with post-industrial areas here in Torino. So for me, it was quite interesting to understand, okay, like this is what could be an Atlantis, how could explode this. In the problem, the most, I think the challenge with an area like Atlantis was a lack of sense of lack of appropriation. So basically, that's the number one in that sense, because people in Atlantis is like, okay, we were based here, this is ours, but not. So there's a kind of a not identity with the place. So the first thing that you have to do with the population in that sense is how you basically work in the appropriation of this. How do you generate sense of belonging and having a kind of a commitment with infrastructure, with the neighborhood and so on. And this is about creating or promoting identity. So for me, in the case of South Africa and this kind of global South circular precinct, or how to land it, it starts with the identity of the sense of belonging, on knowing our traditions, knowing what is available. Okay, this is our school. Okay, we're going to do, I don't know, let's put it in a very banal, a urban farm, or we're going to do an initiative of embroidery, that we're going to do a club to, I don't know, do sewing with all of our used textile, for example. So it's about generating community first in that sense. It's, of course, we can have money, we can have big infrastructure that can come, but I think that with the community first, you have to create those bonds in order so the rest can work. And for example, infrastructure, people will feel identified. Okay, this is our community center. This is the place where we're going to articulate it for reuse it, seeing abandoned infrastructure as an asset of ours. So people in Atlantis, for example, they see all of these abandoned industrial areas as something that is very, and also because of the urban planning of apartheid, that it has highways and so on. So basically makes every space is so far away that you feel insecure, there's no connectivity. So we have to work, I think on my perspective should be, first of all, I think of identity, because, and I'm finishing here, I promise, in post-industrial areas such as here in Torino, where we have all of the abandoned area where was Fiat, we have, it's a workers precinct where people is still very proud of, here was the factory, there's nothing happening, but they feel engaged, they feel this sentiment of doing something about it. Whereas in South Africa, with this past of violence and racism, it's a different relationship with infrastructure. That's it.
I have to agree with that. If you engage with the community in a particular way, sometimes they mistrust the whole process. So it's a very important aspect that we need to consider. A question from the chat that links quite interestingly to that point is, how do you then use that ancestral or cultural knowledge to be incorporated into policy, or maybe the actual plans that come out in the end? I don't know if you could reflect on that with the Atlantis case study.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it is still, or what was my experience, how the Atlantis process was going on, for not saying more of how I experienced that. I think that it's still like not a lot, like it's like there's still a lot of the traditional point of view of planning of, okay, let's do big bridges, infrastructure, like if the people living down there was like, yeah, like generic people that doesn't have like an identity, and that's something that is still a very traditional way of planning. So basically, when we were having these discussions with the traditional leaders, of course, maybe they have another view of how the land should be, but how you also can bring them into the conversation and generate these appropriation processes of infrastructure. And it's not something that is like being drawn over my head, but rather like, okay, how we're creating community like side by side with the government. Is not easy. I'm not saying that these conversations are pretty. No. Like that is where the hard work goes.
Yeah.
But someone has to start the conversation, of course.
Yeah. Thanks. I wanted to add to what Carolina has said. Interesting points there. I also feel that, just like she said, one thing we need to do, irrespective of whatever secular principle we want to implement, is to relate the solution to the local context and make sure that it is applying to the local context. If not, people are going to push back. And even when solutions are relating to local context and solutions are things that have formally been done, people need incentives to be able to do it. Footprints just did produce a research report on regenerative agriculture. And when speaking to farmers, when we realized that we spoke to some farmers who were practicing regenerative agriculture, and they mentioned that practices that we think are we know are regenerative, which are practices that our ancestors used to implement, people are not doing it any longer. And some of these smallholder farmers understand these practices and they know that they are beneficial, but they don't have the means and they feel it is expensive. And so why not go with the conventional way that is already existing? And so people need to be incentivized to do what we are preaching now in terms of circular economy. People also need practical example and tangible example to say that, okay, this is what you're talking about and this is what it looks like. All right, I'm ready to jump on. Because even that is going to get pushback, but you're going to get some buy-in. And at least when you get a foot in the door, then it's a way to get people to come after you. So I'm just going to reflect on, is it Twa House? It's in Nigeria, one of the case studies we came across, and they were using plastic bottles to build a house. So they take the plastic, they fill it with sand, and they have a way they arrange it to build a house. They did that as a prototype, and then they went to the people and said, this is less expensive than what you're using right now. It has better benefits than what you're using right now. And it is secular. And people were asked if they would want to use such a house. People said no. And their reason was because how can you use plastic and expect me to live in that house? It's low, it doesn't make me look high in society. And so people were like, no, I'm not going to use such a house if you sell it to me. Now, this is something they are showing them tangible example. It has better benefits, but people are not going to do it because of societal status and what society is going to say. So when we are bringing about solutions, there are lots of factors to think about. before making your solution, putting your solution out there, and you need to put some little work in it for people to accept it. There is one last one, let me talk about it, Nelplast here in Ghana, and they're also into construction. So they decided to use waste material to produce this bricks that you used to build. Now, I have used it personally for some little construction work I am working on, and they just combine all these materials. They add some concrete and they mix it all up and they combine it. They have this technology around it, and you use less water and less cement when you're building. You just stack the bricks and it is very strong. You can't break it just by throwing it. You have to cut it with this machine. You have to use to cut it. I've forgotten that name. So this is an example of an innovation. Before they could get people to buy in, they had to build a house with it. And they showed people, this is a house we built with plastic bricks. And this is what it looks like. You won't even know it is plastic. And so people saw it. People are like, oh, wow, this is beautiful. This is nice. And that is how people started. I hear people have started buying into the idea. People have started purchasing from them. So there are lots of factors to consider. I'll just end it here with my long talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. That points to the question of the timing of everything. So if we take a longer term view of implementing new ideas, that's how you get to sustainability, like one step at a time. There is one question that I find is quite interesting, is on which indicators can be used to analyze the circularity of cities. Some reports mention that it's a X number of material recycled, but maybe I'd like to open up to the panelists. What types of indicators would you recommend be used to measure circular cities or circular economies within cities?
Mm-hmm. Now, that's an interesting one. I will just first off direct people to shifting paradigms. It is shifting paradigms. He produces materials and mapping the circularity of cities. Mm-hmm. So just to go on there and not having the exact solution answer to this question, but it's interesting because we cannot totally say, I think we cannot totally say a company is secular, a country or a nation or a city is secular by itself and on its own, because circularity cannot be attained by just one entity. It has to do with all the people in the room. It has to do with different people. So you need to consider different aspects, how the materials are being used, the level of waste that is being produced. It has to do with how regenerative their systems are. And I'll use these basic key elements so that when people are able to know how these things are being done and if they are being done effectively and how much people have bought into it and they are implementing these things, then we are able to tell that a city is secular. We cannot just say by recycling that a city is secular, because recycling just brings back these materials into the system, then what? And this is a question I was asking, I have been asking recently. So when we recycle materials and they get back into the system, from the cases that I've been collecting, so far very few people have said that after recycling and producing a new material, then we are thinking about how the end of life of such a material, because people are just thinking about, oh, let's recycle, and the end of life is not being thought about, which I was saying yesterday, it's a danger, it's a possible danger, and we could be creating a linear economy from a circular model or a circular economy. So that's what I have to say to that. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that input. Maybe I think we're running out of time. So if we could summarize, if I could summarize what I thought was valuable and what we could take forth from the session, is the idea of the multiple layers in the circular economy, the different partners that need to be involved, and also the documenting of new projects. I found the Footprints Africa. I've been through the report. I think it's really nice to see what's, and inspiring actually to see these projects from our continent. And the same I can say for Alex's work and Carolina's presentation. I've really learned a lot, and I'm keen to read more, and I'm sure the participants are also keen to see more and learn more. If anybody would like to say anything, I would like to thank the participants for joining us, and a special thank you to the panelists for sharing your knowledge and your work. It's been a great session.
So if I may, I just want to add, since you mentioned it, at Footprints, we are trying to build a case study of circular economy initiatives on the continent. We believe that a lot is going on and people need to see what's going on and they can learn from it. Just like Paul said at the beginning, some cases are secular, but they are not actually terming themselves secular. And some cases that are not, on the other hand, are trying to take the tag secular. And so we need to put out the actual example of what circular economy is and what people are doing so others could learn from it. Our goal is to collect 500 cases by end of year. We are almost ending the year, so we hope to publish that later. We started sending some out already, and we'll be having a launch of one of our new websites where cases are going to be displayed in the form of a story. And I would like to invite people, if you'd like to join us for the launching of that session, kindly send me a chat or an email. You can see our email in the chat, and then we'll send you the invite when that is ready. So it's going to be a website that would house these interesting cases in the form of a story so that people are taken on a journey. And that's going to be an addition to the Knowledge Hub, where we house those case studies, and the Great Arundel map, where we have them on maps across Africa. So thank you. I'll end it here. And just to say, make sure circular situations, we need to make sure they are relating to our local, they are relevant to our local context. And we are starting wherever we are, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, it's just a start, and you don't need to stop there. You need to just build upon it so that we are all winning in the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tomorrow we continue with the Urban Festival, and we really hope to see you at those sessions. For your information, we just posted the session links for tomorrow's sessions there. Thank you and have a great evening, everybody. Bye.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.